Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Puva of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogat Bandita, Filan Cuchita, and dear lovely Kadrinka. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free of any economic hardships, able to get out and do whatever you want within the limitations of do as little harm as possible. Today we have a guest, Lew Richmond, who was a disciple of Shunryu Suzuki, who Lew and I were ordained together back in 1971, right before Suzuki died. Lew is the founding teacher of the Vimala Sangha, Mill Vally Zen group. He's retired from that, and Ed Sadison is the head teacher there now, and Ed is also, he's an abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center. So Lew's retired from that, but as you'll see, he's far from retired. I'm going to just go right into the phone chat with Lew after pause to meditate. And then at the very end, I'm going to read a little from, I have a lot on Lew on Cuke.com. You know, there's my interview, other people's interviews, links. He has a number of books. Hey, well, let me just read you the names of his books right now. Lew's first book was Work as a Spiritual Practice, a Practical Buddhist Approach to Inner Growth and Satisfaction on the Job. His second book was Healing Lazarus, a Buddhist journey from near death to new life. Then there was a whole life's work, living passionately, growing spiritually, and then aging as a spiritual practice. And now there's a new book going to come out this fall, Every Breath, New Chances. How to Age with Honor and Dignity, a Guide for Men. So I just wanted you to get those titles down before we went any further. He's also a musician. He does wonderful music. And we're going to go out with a composition of his. Oh yeah, and we're going to start off with it and maybe throw it in here and there, a couple of places. The music you heard at the first was from Lew's Melantheum Ensemble. In a few places here and there, there will be snippets from a piano and synthesizer composition of his called Mind of Joy. And then we'll go out with the Melantheum Ensemble. Once again, I took these pieces from YouTube. Just go Lew Richmond Melantheum Ensemble or Lewis Richmond music on YouTube, or go to his website, lewisrichmond.com, and there's a link to it. on the page for his music, which you get to by clicking on the media link up there in the bar on top. And the Melanthium ensemble part on it is a sampler of Melanthium music. So the closing piece is the entire sample, and the opening piece is from one of the samples. So when you hear the bell, hit pause and do zazen, meditate, whatever you call it, or not. And when you're through, when you're ready to come back, hit unpause. And we'll hit the bell to end zazen meditation, or whatever you call it or not. And then we'll go right into phone chat with Lew Richmond.
Hello.
Lew, David, how you doing?
Hey, David.
Hi.
Good.
Good to hear your voice.
I was trying to remember whether you were in.
Go on.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah. You're trying to remember where I am?
I saw you. You're in Bali.
Right. Yeah.
I thought you might be in Fiji, but it's pretty early there.
Yeah, it's 6:43 in the morning.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah. Good. Fiji? No, never been to Fiji. I don't think it's got the advantages we have here. But
no, I bet. But I was just reading about the history. It's horrible.
They've got Hindus in Fiji.
The white people enslaved everybody and killed everybody. I mean, it's just,
Oh, ouch. That didn't happen here. They had some bad stuff happen. The Dutch, the Dutch encountered resistance early in the last century, and the royal family of I'm not at Denpasar, but I'm not sure if Denpasar has a royal family. But anyway, the royal family here stood up against them, and they just killed them all. I mean, men, women, and children without any guns and stuff. And
I know. Well,
that happened to a couple of royal families here, and there was some stuff like that. But I don't know. I don't hear bad. Other than that, it didn't go on and on and on. I don't hear much resentment against Dutch. Dutch are a big thing here. So what are you up to, Lew?
Well, I got this book coming out, and the publicity has started for that. It's a book about aging for men. And it's partly about that. It's partly a memoir about, we sold our house in Mill Valley and moved up to the city of Sonoma last year.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it was very, very, yeah. We're living in a adult community just outside of town in a beautiful house. It was very stressful, but we made the transition, and So, the book is not as Buddhist as my other books, but it's me, so it's fairly
Yeah.
Buddhist.
Yeah.
And basically, it's a book for guys like us who are getting old and don't want to get old and don't like how we feel about it, and they think we're 25 or 30 and still chasing women or whatever. I'm trying to get older men to become more aware, become more intuitive, more emotional, and get with the fact that you're old.
Yeah.
And you're not getting any younger. How old are you?
75. And you?
Yeah, I'm 73. It's not as old as it used to be, but it sure isn't young.
Well,
and
yeah.
I also got invited. Another thing I'm doing is I got invited by Tricycle Magazine to do an online class about my other aging book, and that's a Buddhist magazine. So
hey, give us the names of the books.
Okay, well the my latest book, which is coming out in November, is called Every Breath, New Chances. That's something that I learned from Yoshimura Sensei. Remember him?
Oh gosh, of course. Tell me.
Yeah, he used to say that. He used to say one of his teachers would say, "Every breath, new chances."
Oh wow. Yeah, he was great.
And the subtitle is "How to Grow Old with Honor and Dignity: A Guide for Men." Men don't like to be undignified.
Yeah.
And the tricycle class is about my previous book, which came out about 8 years ago, called Aging as a Spiritual Practice.
Right.
And I did 6 videos. I was able to do all of them at home with a video camera, and put quite a lot of Suzuki Roshi into those classes. One of the things he used to say, you may have been in the room when this dialogue happened at Sakoji, but a long time ago, I remember somebody said, hey, it might have been you, said, hey, Suzuki Roshi, why do we do Zazen? And he said, so you can enjoy your old age.
That's right. I remember that. I don't remember if, a lot of times I don't know if I heard something or not because I've read it and worked with it so many times. I'm sort of lost.
Yeah, well, I thought that was an extremely creative answer. I mean, who would have thought that,
Yeah.
But he was old, and he was clearly enjoying himself, even though he was, in not so strong health. And I'm beginning to realize what he meant,
Oh, absolutely.
It's hard to enjoy your old age unless you have a lifetime of dharma in your body to deal with everything.
Yeah.
So I thought it was pretty profound, and that's kind of like, in a sense, the theme of the class.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think about that. That's in Zen is right here, the little book of vignettes.
Shine One Corner of the World.
Yeah, originally to Shine One Corner of the World, which I love that title, but when Shambhala.
Oh, that's where I got the story. I bet you that's where I got the story. Yeah, it's your story.
Yeah,
I picked it up.
Yeah.
And I put it in my book, and so that's, and Tricycle has got a really big online community. They have about 20 or 30,000 people.
Wow.
And so we'll see who signs up for the class, but they're paying me for it, and it'll be a way, with the virus and everything, it's pretty hard to do much when you're in your 70s. You die if you go out. So I'm trying to figure out a way to well, it's not so bad here in Northern California. It's sane here, but still, I mean, it's pretty crazy over here right now. It's really pretty crazy. And so I'm trying to figure out ways to remain relevant without leaving the house, pretty much.
Well, you got a lot of open space there.
Yeah, it's beautiful country. It's wine country. There are vineyards everywhere.
And you have the nice square downtown. And
Yeah,
it has ducks in it, doesn't it? Now, ducks or chickens?
yeah, it has beautiful, beautiful ducks. And where we live it's about 100 acres, about 300 houses, and there's landscaping. There's it's like living in a park, and there's a pond on the property with geese. And beautiful Canada geese. There's a colony of them there.
Wow.
So we go visit them every day. We take a walk every day. There's a lot of retirees in the town of Sonoma, and it's a very comfortable place to live if you're older. And, as you know, the climate's very good, better than Mill Valley. And
yeah.
So, and I haven't been able to meet with my music group because of the virus, but I have my piano, and I'm going to probably record some new piano music and stuff. So, I'm living a pretty quiet life, basically. I'm trying really hard not to watch the news. I don't know how much
I know
you do way over
exactly
there,
how you feel. Well, sure, I get everything. And I know exactly how you feel, and I do limit myself.
There's actually a word that's come up. I don't know if you've come across it. It's called doom scrolling. No, it's a serious word, doom scrolling. Everybody's sitting on their phone doom scrolling, and doom scrolling is an addiction, let me tell you. You read stuff about Trump, and you read stuff about the right-wing conspiracies and all this crazy stuff. And
climate change.
Climate change, yeah. So you can drive yourself completely into the ground. So I'm really trying to, your phone is a window onto the world, so you can do anything on your phone. So I could easily spend 2-3 hours a day just scrolling through news sites, reading shit.
Uh-huh.
And I'm discovering, it's not good for your head. It really isn't.
No. I agree. Absolutely agree. No, I limit it. I definitely limit it. I do a lot of glancing at headlines. I get the Washington. I have what do you call? I pay for the Washington Post and the New York Times online.
Right.
I don't.
Right. Paywall. Yeah.
I don't. I don't spend a whole lot of time on that. Maybe 30 minutes a day on all that. And
yeah.
On a heavy day, an hour. It's instantaneous everywhere. There's not much difference between what I can get and what you can get.
Right. I'm just basically trying to stay quiet, stay focused on my work, what I can do, and got to let the world take care of itself. It's already pretty much going to hell in a handbasket, but there's absolutely nothing I can do about it, or you for that matter. But I wrote a book. It's a good book. The publishers really like it, and they're gonna do their best to get it out there. It's a small press in Berkeley called North Atlantic Books.
Oh, yeah, I know that. Yeah, sure, that's great.
Yeah, well, it turns out North Atlantic, it's got a really cool guy who's the publisher. Everybody there is ultra cool. They've been very, very supportive.
Mm-hmm.
Way better than the big New York houses that used to publish me. They didn't give me the fucking time of day most of the time. But these people are very respectful. They include me, and they're also partnered up pretty closely with Penguin Random House, which is the big kahuna.
Yeah.
And the Penguin people seem to like the book. So, we'll see. I feel good that Yoshimura Sensei and you helped contribute some thinking to the book with Every Breath New Chances and Enjoy Your Old Age and all of that.
Yeah. Well, that's neat. incidentally, I have a sequel to Shine One Corner of the World, which became Zen is Right Here. It's coming out, Shambhala, a year from now, July 1st or something, in July.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Well, Shine was a great contribution, and
It was your
I
idea.
remember.
You're in the acknowledgments. You lead it because you suggested that it be done.
Yeah, it was my idea, and I pitched it to Bill Schinker, and Michael. He went and asked Michael Katz. He said, "Well, who's got the permission to do Suzuki Roshi stuff?" And somehow, and I didn't. I had the idea, but I didn't really have the energy or interest in doing it. And I thought, well, geez, you should do it. You're the one that's the archivist for Suzuki Roshi. So I'm really happy that you did do it. And, just to bring you further up to date, the people that I still hang with a little bit are, of course, Peter Coyote, who I ordained and who's now kind of doing teaching online. He's got a big following.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty good with ideas. I pitched him to do a book about masks, and he did.
Spell that.
And it's going to get published.
A book about what?
Masks. MASKS.
Oh yeah. All right.
He does improv and mask work and all that.
Oh, right.
But he turned the book into something incredibly cool. Did he send you a copy of it?
No, he didn't. But he got hold of me recently, I guess about it, because he used a quote up front, and he wanted to know if I could find a source. And I did. And I sent it to him, and I can't get an answer from him about whether he received it or not.
I'll check with him. But I'm pretty close to Peter.
I sent him the source, it's Mumon Yamada Roshi from a windmill.
Oh no, he got it because it's in the book.
Yeah. Does it say
Peter's
from the
not
windmill?
very good with email, but anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, the book is also about the Lone Ranger and Tonto meet the Buddha. It's a totally wild book. It's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like an improv. It's sort of like an old improv from the 60s. And literally, he's got these recurring scenes where the Lone Ranger and Tonto are riding in the desert and they come across the Buddha.
Oh, I remember this. How long has this been out?
It hasn't been out. He's been working on it
but
for
I
years.
remember. I guess he mentioned that to me or something, because that concept.
Yeah, well, it was very hard to get a publisher because it's so wild, but it's totally Peter. And anyway, that was my idea. I said, Peter, you got to do a book about your mask work, because I've done a mask workshop with Peter, and he's kind of a genius with masks. It's part of acting.
Right.
Anyway,
right.
And I've also been staying in touch with Ed Brown.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Me too. That's great.
Yeah. Ed is a genius, like you.
I want you to talk more about what was your first book? I mean, I know what it was, but you say what it was.
Work as a Spiritual Practice.
Oh, that was your first one, right? And then what was after that?
Well, I nearly died from encephalitis just after it came out, and when I'd recovered enough to write, I wrote a book about it called Healing Lazarus.
Oh yeah, I love that book. Listen, I remember when you had encephalitis. I was at Green Gulch, and we were sitting around waiting for you to die. It was like you didn't have a gag response at one point. Do you know that?
That's right. I didn't have shit. I didn't have an iris response. I was as good as dead. And if you look in the medical textbooks, a person in that state does not survive. Period.
Yeah. So you came back. Well, you had that, and then you had a very serious type of cancer that was likely going to kill you. And you came back from it.
The cancer was earlier. No, David, the cancer was much earlier.
Yeah.
Cancer was in the 80s. That I got cancer shortly after I left Zen Center.
Mm.
That was when I was working for Paul Hawken.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Huh. So one story I remember from Healing Lazarus is how your dog that normally ran around stayed with you while you were sick and ended up dying of cancer, and then you got well.
He had a tumor in the same spot in his body that I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been told that Native Americans have legends like that certain dogs can do that.
Wow. I haven't. There's another case like that at Zen Center. Remember what her name was? Lynn, who was blind.
Yeah, I remember Lynn.
Like she was blind from when she was a baby or something, and she was really blind. And she had a seeing eye dog. And one day in service in the Buddha Hall, she could see. She could see all of a sudden. And it's hard to say her eyesight came back to her because she didn't remember ever having seen anything, maybe some baby memories or something. And her dog went blind. Her seeing
I hadn't
eye
heard
dog.
that story, but that's pretty amazing.
And I asked her, what's the most amazing thing when you could see? She said, faces. And I wrote a song called Faces from that.
The idea is that certain dogs, medicine dogs, have the power to absorb your illness.
Wow.
That's what my dog did, and that's what her dog did.
Wow. Very nice of them.
They can just absorb it. That's that's the only other case I've heard is that story you just told me about Lynn. That's incredible.
Yeah.
But my dog, I took my dog to the vet because he was sick, and the vet took x-rays and showed me where in his body he had this big tumor. And I pulled up my shirt and I showed the vet where my scar was from my operation and it was too much for the vet. He couldn't grok what I was showing him. But I said, look, the dog's got a tumor in the same place in my body.
Yeah. Yeah. I've experienced a number of times in my life people that should be open-minded, just absolutely refusing to let in information that went against their assumptions about what reality is. You know what I mean? Like that.
Well, you may remember that in the depths of my coma and encephalitis, Yvonne brought in this Antonio, this Lama Segu, this South American guy who was a Tibetan doctor.
Mm. Mm.
He came twice, and the second time he came, I never met him, although I've corresponded with him subsequently, but he was driving to Sebastopol, and he suddenly had a flash that I only had hours to live, that my soul was leaving my body. So he turned around and drove back to the hospital and came up the elevator. Now, a person like him can't ordinarily get into a room, but my sister happened to be there, so she let him get in, and he came into the room and did a kind of a puja over my body. And he said that later, he said that when he got there, the Tibetan word is la, which means your spirit. My la was already leaving, and he was able to bring it back into my body. And here's the thing, David, I had no ability to sense outside stimuli, but I dreamed about him at the moment he was there, and I remember the dreams.
Mm. That is amazing.
So
Is that in the book? Is that in the book?
It's yeah, I think so. A little
I
bit,
haven't. It's been
not
so
the
long
details.
since I read it. Yeah. Yeah.
But if people say, well, okay, so the Tibetan Lama brought you back from the dead, I don't say that shit. I just say, look, just like I don't say that my dog took my cancer. I just say, this is what I know.
Yes.
This is what happened.
Yes.
You just draw your own conclusions.
Yes.
People will say, oh, is it because of your Zen meditation that you survived?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
I'm here. People always want to know why this, why that. It's the wrong question, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly the way I feel about, unusual phenomena. Don't interpret, just describe exactly what happened, or in some cases, what somebody said to you. And
Right,
especially
right.
when you're talking to a so-called skeptic. I have a real close skeptical friend, and he'll immediately start jumping to explanations, that some of them more fantastical and extreme than thinking it was psychic.
Yeah,
But
I
I'll say
know.
there's no
Yeah.
need to do that. This is just either what happened to me, or this is what this person said. And that's it. And there's no need to interpret it. I wanted to tell you another one. You remember? Oh, yeah, I know you do because you were treasurer of Zen Center, right? Right?
I was.
Yeah. Do you remember Werner? Werner Hebenstrop? Was he before your time?
Werner Havenstreit, the insurance agent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Werner really well. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now, I don't think he's with us anymore. Is
No.
he? No. All right.
No.
Now here's I either heard this from him because I used to talk to him. He'd come to Greens, and or I heard it from Avant. Is that when he had quadruple bypass? You remember that?
Right. I remember that.
And he dreamed. Either he dreamed or he visualized as he was going under that he was walking in the fields around Mount Tam. And after the operation, he had poison oak.
Well, that's something.
Yeah. All right.
That's
all right.
pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, now after. Hey, I want to stick with healing Lazarus again, because the message of that book is really good. That you just had to be. I mean, aside from being reborn, you had to regrow up.
Kind of.
And you talk about how helpful your wife Amy was and what she had to put up with as you readjusted to, being a person. And you also said that everything you'd learned in life, in Zen and everything, didn't help. I mean, how would you phrase all that now?
Well, it's been 20 years since I wrote that book, and I don't know if I would exactly say that. I think that one thing, I had a very strong vision during my healing.
Yeah.
Of three spirit guides that I could almost see in my mind's eye all the time. One was my birth mother, who died when I was 4.
Oh.
And she was there. And the other one was Suzuki Roshi. He was in Zazen, looking at me. And the third one, this is in the book, but you may have forgotten, was this guy named Butch. He was like an ex-Marine, tough guy, you know, from the 50s with his T-shirt, you know, sleeves rolled up, muscles.
Yeah.
And they were, each one of them provided me with a kind of, with help to get better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Each one of them was an aspect of who I was. And the most surprising, I mean, it's not surprising my mother was there. It's not surprising that Suzuki Roshi was there, but this guy Butch, I realized that's a part of me. You know, inside I'm a pretty tough guy. I'm like that.
Yeah.
There's some part of me that's like that, and he actually said things to me. He was the only one to talk. He would say things to me sometime. You know, he'd say, you know, get off the floor, sucker, and you know, he'd talk like a tough guy.
Yeah.
And those three guides provided me with what I needed to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that is really interesting. Well, you know what I said about you saying the Zen didn't help or anything. That might have just been something you said offhand to me someday, because I can't remember what was in the book or what you said.
Well, let me put it this way: it's not that Zen or my Zen practice helped me, but Suzuki Roshi helped me.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah. I would also imagine that your Zen practice helped you in.
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. And, you know, amazingly enough, physiologically, my brain injury was moderate to mild. I mean, you know, I could walk, I could talk, I could read, I could remember stuff. I mean, I didn't have, you know, major brain damage like you have after a stroke. But I was pretty messed up. I mean, I was pretty messed up for about a year, and then I slowly got better, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I remember even a few in subsequent years after that, you know, I'd see you and we'd talk about it, and you'd tell me what percentage you had come back. You know, it's getting up to 90% back, and
yeah.
But I couldn't. It seemed like 100 to me.
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of it was stuff that only I could sense. I had a really great doctor, you know, rehab doctor, and I saw her after a few years, and I said, you know, she had predicted that I would get better 100%. I said, how did you know that? And she said, well, I have a sixth sense. And then she said, and it also depends on the kind of brain you start with. She knew that I had an unusual brain, let's put it that way, you know, that had some. But here's what's really mysterious, David. If you try to look at this scientifically, my brain healed, okay?
Yeah.
Well, how does it know how to do that? Where are the blueprint? Where's the backup drive? You know what I'm saying?
Hey, yeah.
Where are the plans?
Yeah.
How does it know? They don't really know that. I had a really good neurologist who's a student of Jack Kornfield's. As you may know of him, his name is Rick Mendius. And I asked Rick Mendius, and he said, "Well, we don't know any of that stuff. We don't know anything about the brain.
Yeah,
it's all mysterious."
Yeah.
But you know, my brain basically put itself back together, probably cell by cell, molecule by molecule, all by itself.
Yeah.
That's what healing is. That's what healing is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And nobody understands it. I mean, people that say they understand it are just blowing smoke. They don't know.
Yeah. 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 Well, you know this thing about, the media always has to pit things as opposed to each other, like evolution versus creation, evolutionism versus creationism. I always say, well, I'm a creationist and an evolutionist. I think the universe is creating itself all the time, every second, and it's intelligent and it's brilliant and it's mysterious and it's far beyond our ability to comprehend. It's amazing.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. But the difference is that the media can only see it in terms of there being an external being that's creating it.
Well, it's a metaphor. Most people don't have the subtlety or the sophistication to understand what you just said. I mean, Peter Coyote, who actually studied the Suzuki Roshi archive a lot, came across a very, very interesting lecture. You probably know it. It's about when Suzuki Roshi went back to Japan to visit in the late 60s, and he saw pollution in Japan for the first time.
That's right. Yeah, I know it.
And he had a very interesting way of putting it. I mean, he said, because of the way that human beings are polluting the world, that we're going to lose the ability to return to emptiness and have it be recreated properly. He used the term emptiness almost like the way a Native American would use the term creation or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's very unusual. He's never used that language before or since that I can tell. But he was basically saying that the natural world, unsoiled by human intervention, is constantly creating itself out of emptiness.
Yeah.
But that if you put too much pollution and plastic shed and chemicals and benzene and stuff into the streams, which he saw when he was there, it won't be able to do it. It was kind of an intuitive environmentalist position that he was taking.
Yeah.
In which he created. Yeah. Remember that?
Yeah, I was very impressed by it. I mean, in recent years, I was impressed. A lot of stuff I see and appreciate now that, passed me by back then. I wouldn't.
But I don't remember having read that. But
well, I wasn't there for that lecture. That lecture was in the city, and wait a minute. Yeah, I was at Tassajara then. That lecture was January of 1971.
Something like that. And he was kind of sad and grieving for the way that the Japan that he remembered from his childhood was being destroyed.
Yeah. Well, oh yeah, and also, like he'd have to go back to Rinso-in and see that they'd cemented the creeks. How the Army Corps of Engineer has a reputation in America. I used to hear more about it, of wanting to dam everything and cement everything. Nothing compared to Japan.
You mean they actually put concrete in the creek bed?
They lined it. They make they make it like with cement walls, and it like when it goes down, they'll even have cement on the floor of it in place, and it's completely unnecessary. But everybody there, not everybody, I shouldn't say that at all. People there tend to respect authority, and they think, well, that's important to stop erosion and for flood control and stuff like that. There was a lot of that there's been a ton of that in America, but they use 30 times the amount of cement that the United States does per capita. That's it.
That must
30
have really
times.
pissed off. That must have really pissed off Suzuki Roshi to see all that.
Yeah. I mean, it's terrible. Oh, and they've screwed up so many of their beaches, to stop erosion, with these giant cement things like tetrahedrons. I wanted to do a coffee table book of them because there would be different shapes. And like when you played jacks, you got those little stars that roll sort of. They'd be like that, but they'd be 10 feet tall, made out of cement.
I know. Didn't they do some kind of a wall like that in Fukushima with a nuclear reactor, and it wasn't?
Well, Fukushima, they just did a wall. They did like a 60-foot wall, that completely blocked the view of everybody of the ocean. I mean,
but it wasn't tall enough, right?
well, that's new. No, that's a new wall. And so
A new wall. I see.
it's a new wall. It's a post tsunami wall. But you know what people did hundreds of years ago in Fukushima? There are markers on the hillsides that say, "Do not build below here."
Oh, really? Well, I remember reading about it, David, that when they were going to build a nuclear reactor, they went back to 9th century texts. Because in the 9th century, there were some huge tsunamis, and some monks wrote down, what had happened and how far the water came up. And they said, okay, this is about as high as it's ever going to be, so we'll engineer to that point. But that wasn't as high as it could be. It could go higher. It just so happened that in the 9th century, that's how high it went. So that's, believe it or not, that's how they planned the reactor. Pretty stupid, actually.
Yeah. I have a good friend in Japan who was an engineer for Fukushima, and he has spent a great deal of his adult life before the nuclear accident warning about it, and he'd have a small number of people would listen and believe it, but it just, you couldn't go against the tide there. In fact, you can't go against the tide in general in the world, but more so there. God, but Jared Diamond in his book Collapse: How Societies Choose to Succeed or Fail, he gives Japan very high marks for survival, and he gives America very low marks. Oh,
really?
Yeah. So they do a lot of things right there. All right. Now after healing Lazarus, what came next?
I wrote a book called A Whole Life's Work, which flopped. But it was basically, the idea was to be a kind of sequel to Work as a Spiritual Practice. And it was an effort. I think I was the first person to try to map the 6 paramitas against the life cycle of a human being.
Oh.
I think the reason it flopped is the title doesn't tell you anything about the book.
Yeah.
What does a whole life's work mean? I mean,
look, say it flopped. It's still there. As long as there's a human race, it'll be there.
People still buy it. And the 4th book was, Aging as a Spiritual Practice, which has been my best book. It's a perennial. It's still selling quite well. There'll always be people getting old. And I discovered that the majority of the readers for that book were women.
Oh, interesting.
Women tend to buy self-help. I stopped in at a bookstore here a few years ago and talked to the bookstore owner and said I was going to write a book for men. And she said, well, be careful, because the only books men buy are about sex and money.
Now, who was that? Are you talking about?
That was a bookstore.
What bookstore?
At Reader. These are the people that own Reader's Books in downtown Sonoma.
I know them.
Well, she died. Lilla died.
Oh.
She fell down a flight of stairs. But anyway, that was her comment. But anyway, I decided to write a book for men, but the strategy is to get women to buy it, to give to men. Which we think they'll do. I've got a chapter in there called What Women Think, and I got some really good interviews from some women about what they think about us, aging men. They think we're stupid. That we don't know shit. We don't know shit about our bodies, and we're unrealistic. And women feel like, every 30 days from the time we're 13, we have to deal with not feeling good. And you guys think you're 60 years old and you still think you can do a 50-mile bike ride. You're stupid, So I mean, it wasn't that bald, but I mean, basically, I'm going to be a strong pitch for. And you know who wrote a really nice blurb for it, and also for my last book, was Thomas More. Thomas More is a fan of my books.
Yeah, I'm in touch with him.
We corresponded, and he wrote a really nice blurb.
Yeah.
And Diane Rossetto wrote a really nice blurb, and I got some good blurbs. Peter Coyote wrote the foreword, a really nice foreword. So another person I'm close to and I feel like is a real friend is Bruce Fortin.
Yeah.
He's a very substantial person and always has been. And
yes.
I've been doing some Zoom calls with those guys, and many, if not most, of the people that I knew in the Buddhist scene, they were like fellow travelers. Not very many of them were really friends. Like, you were always a friend from the very beginning. You were a friend, and Ed was a friend, and there were friends. But a lot of people, if you're not actually in their scene and you're not showing up and doing things, that you kind of don't exist anymore. Maybe that's, I don't know if you feel that or if it's just getting old or something.
Well, yeah, well, people can only keep up with so much,
Yeah.
Most people.
But you were the most friendly person at Sakoji. Sakoji was pretty scary when I first went there. I was very intimidated. And I walked up the stairs the first time, and you were at the top of the stairs. And you said, "Hey, my name's David. What's your name?"
Huh.
And you were very friendly. And I thought, well, I guess it isn't all weirdos and creeps here. This is probably a place I can be. Another person that was always very friendly from the very beginning was Yvonne.
Yes. Yeah.
The early folks were friends. I'm still, friendly with Peter Schneider. I mean, Yvonne is pretty much gone now,
Oh, yeah, she's in hospice.
Bad. Yeah. So they think she's going to die?
I don't know, but she's in hospice. It's just she's too far gone to deal with it at home. And she hadn't been eating.
And Dan Welch, I'm still very tight with Dan.
Oh, good. You're in touch with Dan.
Yeah, all the early people,
Oh.
We're like the people that were there when it happened. And, we'll never meet a person, well, we haven't in our whole life, like Suzuki Roshi, and it's just very fortunate that we had the time we had with him. He was extraordinary. Trungpa once said to his people, and it got back to me, that he said he couldn't understand how a Dzogchen master could show up in Japan like him. I mean, he was very, very impressed with Suzuki Roshi.
Oh, indeed. Yeah. Oh, he was head over heels in love with him.
Well, yeah, and also because he'd lost connection with all of his teachers, from the old days. He was really bereft of mentors, and he kind of went off the deep end because of that, I think.
Yeah.
He'd lost his culture, he'd lost his mentors, he'd lost the people, and he was too high-ranking in the culture to have anybody be able to tell him anything.
Yeah. Well, he had this idea that he would actually state that you got to burn your desires out, but really there's no end to it. And I think he made some critical mistakes there because he killed himself.
The guy was flat out brilliant, though. Even today I can pick a book, Trungpa book off my bookshelf, and I read it. It's not his native language. And I'm thinking, holy shit, this guy is unbelievable,
Oh, yeah. His command of English was superior, definitely.
I think that one of the things I've learned in my life with extraordinary people, genius-type people, is, the kind of person they are and the kind of genius they had don't necessarily go together at all. They're, you remember the movie Amadeus?
Oh, of course.
You remember the first scene where Salieri is in the mental hospital and he's talking to the priest?
No.
Well,
Just
the first scene, Salieri is in a mental hospital. He's being visited by a priest, and he tells the priest the first time he met Mozart and heard his music.
Mm.
And he said, "Father, you have to understand, it was the voice of God. It was the voice of God." He was very passionate about it. I mean, he'd never in his life heard music like that.
Mm.
And then he said, "Father, you have to explain to me, you're a priest, because I don't understand. How could the good Lord have given such talent to such a creature?"
That's great.
He used to call him the creature. And Mozart was, kind of a pretty crude person, actually. But he had this genius.
I didn't know.
He had this genius. And that movie is a great movie about talent, actually.
Yeah.
That's a great classic play about talent. I love that movie because talent lands unpredictably wherever it happens to land, and it doesn't necessarily land in the lap of a saint.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very interesting point. Yeah, and that's why writing people off because of their faults is a big mistake. You got to see people. We shouldn't be blind to their faults at all, but we shouldn't let their faults erase their contributions or their good points. At this point, Lew had to go, and so we agreed that I would call him back. So he will return after the musical interlude.
Hey, David.
Hi, Lew. We meet again.
Right.
Right. Well, it was yesterday. It was really good talking with each other. We did a lot of catching up, and I wanted to talk to you some more because there were some things I wanted you to tell us about your music, a little more of some of them, if there's any books we've missed. There's a lot of stuff you've done in terms of teaching. It'd be neat to mention, but whatever you feel like. Also, I wouldn't mind going back to how you got into all of it and that sort of thing. So whatever you feel like.
Okay, well, why don't you throw me a question and I'll respond.
Well, why don't you just tell us about your music? I mean, your music is a big part of your life.
Well, I was trained from a young age as a musician. My mother was a music teacher, and my uncle was a very famous church musician. So I had a pretty intensive education in piano and composition when I was pretty young. I wrote my first compositions when I was 7 or 8 years old. And when I went to college, my mother had the idea that I'd be, a professional musician and go to Paris to study with Nadia Boulanger, and she had all these ideas. But, I was pretty young when I went to college. I was 16, so I didn't really buy into these parental plans particularly. By the time I graduated, I was, I got radicalized like you, but in this case, a little later, it was the war, and so I took a detour into being an anti-war activist. Graduated in '67. That was right at the height of the Vietnam War, and I came out to the West Coast. Amy and I were married, and I went to Unitarian Seminary that first year. That was partly an interest in religion, and also it was a great draft deferment. So, and I got involved in activism out here in the West Coast, and so that was one of the several times in my life I put music on hold. Keep in mind, although I wasn't fully conscious of it at the time, I was, maybe 20 years old. I'd been around, I went to summer music camp and stuff. I was around young kids who were, ready for the big time in music. And people at Juilliard studying with world famous musicians. And I realized I really wasn't at their level. I mean, I wouldn't be, number one, I realized I wasn't good enough for the big time. And number two, I realized that in those days, to be a professional classical musician, you had to travel constantly if you were successful. And I hated to travel. So I kind of, music faded into the background, and I did other things. While I was at seminary, I did a field project on Buddhism because it interested me. I read about it in college. And so I went over to this temple in San Francisco called Sokoji, and actually, no, take it back. This is interesting. I saw an ad in the Berkeley Barb for Zen.
Yeah?
And it turned out it was the Berkeley Zendo.
No kidding.
Yeah. So I went there early one morning and, with Mel Weitzman, and we sat, there were 5 or 6 people in his living room.
What date was this, would you estimate?
Well, that was in '67.
What month?
Oh, I don't know that. I mean, maybe
spring.
Oh, it would have been
summer.
in the winter. He built a fire, so it would have been in the winter, either late '67 or the winter of '68.
Oh, okay.
And the second or third time I went, I was facing the wall, and I heard somebody come in and sit down. I heard the robes rustling. Sit down maybe 5 feet in back of me. I was very close to the front. And the whole period of Zazen, I could hear him very slightly breathing, very regular breathing as he exhaled. And that was Suzuki Roshi. That was the first time I met him in Berkeley Zendo. And, I was like the first time you met him. I mean, he gave a talk. There's maybe 8 or 9 people there. I mean, those were the days when everything was just getting started. And he would go regularly to Bill Kwong's in Mill Valley, to the Berkeley Zendo. He'd go down to the peninsula to Marion Derby's. I mean, he made the rounds of the satellite groups. And so that's how I first got to know him. And he would sometimes stay for breakfast at Mel's, and so I would have breakfast with him. Here's a breakfast story that you may not have in your vast archive of stories. It's
good,
funny.
Good.
We were we were, having breakfast in the kitchen at a table with 4 or 5 other people, and Suzuki Roshi was there with Oak-san. Actually, Oak-san came. So I was serving the zucchini, the squash. Mel had made zucchini for breakfast. It was the vegetable. So I politely asked Oak-san if she wanted some vegetable, and she said "skosh," which in Japanese means a little bit. And I thought she said squash, but I wasn't sure. I was, very insecure and wanted it to be the right thing. So I said, "You mean squash?" And she said, "Yeah, skosh." So we went back and forth, and finally Suzuki Roshi, you know how he is, he just very clearly and quietly said zucchini. It's a small thing, but it's he had a skill of saying something that would calm things down. I know there was a story that you probably told or maybe learned from Hoitsu about there was a conflict in Japan over a temple roof or something, and the people were arguing. Well, it wasn't about a roof. They were arguing about something. And finally, he didn't say anything. And finally, in that same quiet voice, he said, "Such and such a temple has a beautiful roof." Is that a story that I got from you?
The best I can say is that rings a bell. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere.
But what the point of the story is that it was simply a true statement that everybody could agree on. That temple was famous for having a beautiful roof. So all he said was, "Such and such a temple has a beautiful roof," meaning there is something in this room that we can all agree on. Just interesting, his conflict resolution style. But, it was a sort of example of that, zucchini, We weren't getting anywhere with squash and skoshi, so he just used a different word. Anyway, so that's how that got started. But I've digressed. I went over to, let's see, we went up to Oregon and lived for a while in a commune because I thought I'd be going to jail for being a draft resistor, but that never happened. You may know that secretly it was LBJ who told Ramsey Clark, "Don't arrest the college kids, it'll kill us."
Oh, is that right? No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, let him be. It was LBJ who kept me out of jail. I thought it was Ramsey Clark, but it was the president's directive, leave the college kids, unless they're troublemakers. If they're troublemakers, put them in the slammer. But if they're just resisting, just let them be, because we can't. If those middle-class white college kids start going to jail, we're going to be screwed, something like that. So anyway, I never went to jail, and so I came back from Oregon to I missed Zen Center and I missed Suzuki Roshi, so I came back. We lived in Berkeley, and Amy and I got ready to go to Tassajara. We signed up to do it, and our first practice period was also the first practice period Tatsugami came, which would have been winter of '69. And
I mean, it's Tatsugami's first was. He arrived January of 1970.
Well, that was our first practice period.
Winter of 69, 70. Yeah.
Yeah, and we were his Jisha Anja for the second practice period, so I was very close to him. Anyway, all this time, music was on ice. I didn't really get back into music until we fast forward to '83, when the Dick Baker thing blew up, and we decided to leave Zen Center in the spring of '84. And at that point, we rented a house in Mill Valley. By that time, I bought a piano. I built a clavichord, which is a very, very quiet keyboard instrument.
Right.
when Amy was pregnant, so I had it. But then I bought a piano. So when we moved out, I took up my music again at that point in '84. All the time we were at Zen Center, the rule was, we didn't do music, we didn't have pets, we didn't, do any of those things. We were supposed to be, meditating. So I thought it was all bullshit. I remember going to Tassajara. We had a dog, a beautiful Samoyed, and Peter Schneider told us in no uncertain terms, you cannot have a dog at Tassajara. So we had to give away the dog. And we went to Tassajara, and guess who had a dog at Tassajara?
Well, and
Peter and Jane had a dog.
Who? Oh, Peter and Jane. Well, you mean Noah?
Yeah.
Noah?
Yeah.
Noah didn't belong to Peter and Jane. Noah was a community dog.
Oh, well, anyway, there was a dog there, but we couldn't bring our own dog.
Right,
anyway,
but the rule was there can only be Noah. Yeah, Noah came in before the first practice period with Nancy Lay, and
I see. Well,
been there
anyway,
a long time.
I'm sort of trying to stay with the music thing. After we left Zen Center, I got back into music. I realized I love music. I missed it, and at some point along the way, I was able to secure for a small amount of money the beautiful Steinway Grand that was at Page Street.
Is that right? You got
Oh, yeah.
that.
They didn't want it. It had been given to them by this wealthy lady. And wait a minute, it's the piano that was at Liz Swami's.
No.
Remember that piano that Liz had?
Well, sure, but she got rid of it.
Well, that piano went to this woman in Bodega Bay, and then it went to me, and it's sitting in my living room today.
Well, Liz always had a piano, but what type
was
it?
Yeah, this is what. It was a Steinway. It was a beautiful piano.
Was it a baby grand?
Bigger than a baby grand. It was a 7-foot grand.
Oh, if that was Liz's, oh my God, I can't believe it. I mean, I lived with it, but I forgot. Well, then later I realized, that was way before I started living with Liz. I started living with her in '76, and we got the building in '69. And so somewhere before that, Lew got that piano. But Liz always had a piano, and usually a harpsichord, too.
Yeah, well, Carmen's funny. I got that piano, but anyway, I started playing again. I started composing. I started recording. I started, getting back to my music in my own way.
Yeah, yeah.
This is when I was, I had a job at Smith & Hawken, and and I made my first piano solo album down in the basement of our house there with that piano and some electronic instruments. And so slowly I began to, create a body of work. And I've done 5 albums of music. They never really went anywhere in terms of getting out there. I've got boxes and boxes and boxes in the garage of my CDs. But the link I just sent you to Songs of Lazarus, that was my most recent piano album, it's 20 years ago. So there was a period of time when I did a lot of that stuff, and then fast forward to the last few years, I formed a music group in which the trumpet player is Jay Rosetto of Diane and Jay Rosetto. You probably know them.
Mm-hmm.
They were at Berkeley Zendo for many years, and some other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a lot of music for them, and we performed and we record.
And how many people are there, and what instruments are there?
Well, it's a group. It's 5. There's me on piano. There's Jay Rosetto on trumpet. There's a well-known jazz bassist named Fred Randolph on bass. There's a guy named Craig Fry on violin, and the drummer is Ward Spangler. Ward is a professional percussionist, plays in the local symphonies. Jay is a very illustrious, well-known trumpet teacher. These are really good guys. And
what's the name of the group? What's the name of the group?
It's called Melanthium, Melanthium, as in Mary, Melanthium. You go to melanthium.com and you can hear the music.
Mm-hmm.
And, the coronavirus shut us down. So, all this time, starting in, my first book was published in 98, I was also writing books. So my first book was Work as a Spiritual Practice. Then we talked about healing Lazarus after I recovered from my encephalitis. That was in 99. I wrote A Whole Life's Work in 2001. That was a kind of a book about the life cycle of a human being as reflected in the six paramitas. Then my Works of Spiritual Practice was a minor bestseller. And, that was interesting how that happened, because it really came out of, when I left Zen Center in 84, I went to work at Smith and Hawken, and it was really quite a shock to go from Zen Center, where everybody was quiet and meditative, and there was kind of a taboo against getting angry, really. But in the ordinary workaday world, people got angry all the time, and it was just normal. And they had emotions, and they yelled at each other. And the mission of the company was to make money. It was a for-profit company, Garden Tools.
Mm-hmm.
It became very well known. And, I was very quickly the number 2 person in the company under Paul.
Yeah.
And ran the company with him.
You were president, weren't you?
Executive VP.
Uh-huh.
Paul was president.
Oh, yeah.
And I was there for about 10 years. And so my first book was really, how do you bring mindfulness practice and Buddhist principles and ethics and dealing with emotions in the workplace? And it was what's called a first of genre book. Nobody had ever thought of doing a book like that. So Bill Schenker, who was at that time at Broadway Books, bought the book and published it, and was very, very enthusiastic. Regrettably, the encephalitis came just after the book was published, so I was really out of circulation and couldn't follow up on the book's early success. But it's still in print. And yeah. I'm told by my friends in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that every spring for the last, 20, 25, 30 years, the Harvard Coop puts it in the window, Work as a Spiritual Practice for the seniors.
Ah.
So it's been influential. And my second book, Healing Lazarus, was not a big seller, but you read it. And so
yeah.
It's very heartfelt. And people that were in a situation like that, where their spouse or somebody they knew or themselves had a brain illness or a brain injury, I used to get these incredibly heartfelt emails and messages from people that my book saved their life, and nobody understood what was going on in their brain except me, and I really understood, and all of that. So all those books, books are in print forever now because of digital printing.
Yeah.
So all those books are out there, as you point out, and A Whole Life's Work maybe is the one that sells the least, but Aging as a Spiritual Practice, which came out in 2012, has been very successful, and again was the first of genre. There was nobody up to that point that really had put together aging and spiritual practice, and that's a pretty Buddhist book. I mean, there's a lot of Buddhist practices in there, and it really looks at aging as a teaching of, it's an instance of the teaching of impermanence, and you can understand that teaching deeply by experiencing your own aging. That's really the point of the book. It's a way to use aging as a kind of wisdom path for yourself. And so my writing efforts and my music kind of were two parallel tracks. The third track was after I left Zen Center. For a long time, I didn't want to have anything to do with Zen. I was angry for about 10 years, and then
really, no kidding.
Yeah. But then I started spending time with Mel again, just having lunch and stuff. Mel was always very supportive, a good friend.
Yeah.
And one day, I mean, this is kind of interesting. One day I went over for a morning lecture. I never wore my robes, put my robes away, never wore my robes. That was very important. I wasn't going to do that anymore. So I was at the Berkeley Zendo. I forget what year it was, maybe 2000, 2001. And I watched Mel bowing for service. And something about the way he bowed, which seemed very authentic to me. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't laying a trip on you. He wasn't narcissistically showing you how enlightened he was. He was just doing it in a very kind of authentic way. And I suddenly felt that I could be, a Buddhist again, watching him.
That's touching.
Yeah, it was a really big moment. I started with him, and I never, I got very disconnect. I was very close to Dick, very much on the inside. I saw a lot of things that probably nobody else saw, and it was.
Hang on one second. Hang on one second. Hi, I'm talking to Lew Richmond. Katrinka says hi.
Yeah. So I was pretty upset from all of that. It took me a long time to recover, but Mel was always an anchor, and I could always talk to him. And after that moment in service, we started having lunch, and the subject of transmission. I started transmission with Dick.
Right.
Mel and Reb and I were all doing it together.
Oh.
And I was about halfway through when everything blew up.
Yeah.
And
then you said
at one point
to heck with it. I remember.
At the time, and I actually when I had cancer, I actually felt that the silk transmission papers that I still had were making me sick, so I burned them. But anyway, much later, Mel and I were having lunch, and the subject of transmission came up, and he said, "Well, look, let's just do it." You know how he is.
Yeah.
Let's just do it. And I suddenly felt, he was very, very patient, but I think he knew where things were headed and what my intention was. And so we did. Christmas of 2002, I went to Page Street for 7 days. We did it at Page Street because I was working and I couldn't go to Tassajara. And so we did transmission there. And this was sort of funny. I said afterwards, now listen, Mel, we did transmission. I appreciate that, but I'm not going to start a group. That's not what I do. I'm not going to start a group. I'm a writer, and that's how I'm going to teach. He said, fine. And of course, the next year I started a group.
Give us the name of the group. Sangha. Give us the name. Yeah. Say it again.
Vimala Sangha. It's named after Vimala Kirti, who was the great layman, lay wise person at the time of the Buddha, and I was really emphasizing ordinary practice of lay people. And the way it happened actually was Ed Sadazan and Gib Robinson came to my house, and they had been talking, and they felt I really should teach. So they asked me to teach. They said, you should really teach.
Mm.
And I thought, well, if people ask you to teach, it's pretty hard to say no. So it wasn't like it was my idea. It was their idea, but I was responsive to it.
Mm. Mm.
So we started Vimala Sangha. Ed and Gib and I started it together. And it's still going on. Ed leads it.
Yeah.
And I split off. We used to meet Friday mornings, but then I started an evening group, and I split that group off, and I led the evening group. Ed led the morning group, and Gib led the morning group. Keep in mind, during this time, I had several people who had approached me to be ordained.
Mm.
Including Al Tribe.
Right.
And we veered away from music, but I mean it's all
That's fine.
part of my
good.
life,
Yeah.
And I also spent 6 years doing the spot priest training with Grace Shearson and Darlene Cohen and Steve Stuckey. We were the teachers.
Oh yeah.
And from 2006 to 2012, we did that together and trained maybe almost 100 people. Very few people from the San Francisco Zen Center, but lots of people from other groups, like Berkeley Zendo and groups from around the country and Darlene's group. So a lot of them were teachers and priests. And so during that time, I collected 7 people that I was working to ordain. So I was really back into the being a Zen teacher in a major way during that period.
Mm.
But the only people I actually ended up ordaining, I ordained 5 people. I ordained a woman named Karen Geiger who died not too long afterwards. I ordained Ed, of course. I ordained Ed first as doing lay entrustment, Green Roxu, but then I ordained him as a priest, and I ordained Peter Coyote. I ordained Peter Shearson. I ordained Al Tribe. And Al is no longer with us. That's very tragic.
Yeah.
Because he was really helping Ed do Vimala Sangha. And I also ordained a guy named Lynn Maslow, but things didn't work out between us, so he's gone. So of all those people I ordained, really Peter Coyote is the one I'm still in touch with and still work with. And he's, as you may know, he's now teaching. He's got a Facebook Live Dharma talk every week. He's doing that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how my life went. I'm working on this new book, and
remind us the name of the new book again, please.
Every Breath, New Chances: How to Age with Honor and Dignity, a Guide for Men.
Yeah.
Every Breath, New Chances.
Yeah.
And as I told you yesterday, it's being published by North Atlantic Books. They're really wonderful people over in Berkeley, and they're partnered up with Penguin Random House. So, they're kind of almost like an imprint of Penguin, really. They have a lot of resources from Penguin.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling good about that. And James Shaheen is the editor of Tricycle, saw my notice about the book, and he reached out and said, we'd like you to do an online class for my other book, Aging as a Spiritual Practice. I did one for Tricycle 8 years ago when the book first came out, and it was the most popular class they'd ever had at that time. So he wanted me to do it again. So I I just finished doing all the video for that, and that'll go live on the 24th of September.
Wow, that's really good. I mean, it's so great. You're so active, and you know, you didn't really retire when you stopped doing Vimala Sangha. You just moved on.
Yeah. Well, you know, part of it was just age. I mean, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of work to do a group every week. You know, you have to go to the place. My evening group met at the Congregational Church up in Tiburon, and we'd have to go. Amy and I would go, get out the zafus, get out the zabatons, set everything up. You know, it was very physical. You know, set up the altar, and then people come, and then you put it all down. You know, it's hard to get, and most of the people in these groups are older people too. At a certain point, we decided that it was just we didn't have the physical energy to really do it, so I stopped doing it. But Ed is still doing the Mill Vally Vimala Sangha. He has a very loyal group after almost 20 years, and he does that in addition to his work at the San Francisco Zen Center. So all of that is stuff that I started, you know, and handed off to other people. Yeah, pretty good. No, you're right. I never really, you know, when you start as young as we did, and when you do it as intensely as we did, and you had a teacher like Suzuki Roshi, it's in your bones. You can't really stop. It's part of who you are. And so I think that period of 10 years where I was just working in the world and not doing much in Zen was, the way I talked about it at the time was, it's like, you know, I had to figure out what had happened inside of me. And it was like, if you're repairing a carburetor, you have to take the whole thing apart, all the pieces, and clean them, you know, and put it back together very carefully. And I felt like that was kind of what I was doing, is rebuilding my carburetor so that I could run the engine again, you know, which I finally was able to do. So there's lots of stories in the Zen tradition where there's a great story that I love. I can't remember the name of the guy, but you'll know. He's the guy who he kept asking his teacher a question. His teacher said, I won't say. Is it alive or dead? The koan where the teacher knocks on the coffin during a funeral, and the student afterwards says, was he alive or dead? That was his spiritual question, and the teacher said, I won't say. At a certain point, he said, you have to say, if you don't tell me, I'll hit you. And the teacher said, well, you can hit me if you want to, but you better run, because if people in the monastery find out you hit me, they'll kill you. So he hit the teacher. And sure enough, senior monks went gunning for him. So he disappeared. And he said, I'm done with Zen. I hate Zen. I'm never going to do it again. He went and lived in a hut for 10 years. And this is the guy who heard the bamboo hitting in the stream, hitting a piece of wood.
Oh, yeah.
And it woke him up. I've forgotten his name, but it's a famous koan.
Guishan Lingyu, Japanese Isan Ryu.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it was for me. I mean, it was like, I'm done with this. I hate this stuff. I'm not going to do it anymore. But, you know, it was really more like I had a question that I couldn't answer inside of myself, that I just needed a lot of time to process, and I did other things. at a certain point, in my case, maybe it was when I saw Mill Vally. That was like, the bamboo hitting for me. It was like something happened. And it connected me to those very first days at the Berkeley Zendo and how I got started. It was like starting over at the same place that I started. And everything kind of opened up at that point.
I have here who it was. It's Dogo and Zengen.
Yeah.
Dogo was the disciple and Zengen was the teacher.
Right.
I just, while you were talking, I just Googled it.
Yeah.
And got it.
So that's kind of how that story is kind of how it was for me. I just needed time. There was actually a time when all alone I went down to Tassajara and spent 14 hours with Richard, trying to figure out what had happened, and he kept trying to explain to me what had happened. It was sort of like the disciple saying, "Is it alive or dead? You have to tell me." And Richard at that time really couldn't tell me. He couldn't explain it in a way that I could understand. So I left.
Yeah.
I had to figure it out for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of people from those days had to figure it out. I mean, it was a huge thing, and people scattered, and they all went through their own process. I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people, and they each have their own story. But anyway, this is my story.
Right.
And I guess I felt that I had, when everything opened up and I ended up receiving transmission from Mill, I felt that I was finally, remember, you and I were ordained together with Ed and Angie just before Suzuki Roshi died.
Right.
And I took that very seriously. I was his ordained disciple, and I felt like I had a responsibility to finish that. So, receiving transmission, ordaining people. I gave 4 people transmission. I finished my work that I felt I needed to do to complete what started when Suzuki Roshi ordained me. I never asked to be ordained.
Mm-hmm.
Suzuki Roshi walked up to me at Tassajara once, and in the summer, and said, "If you want to be ordained, we should talk." So it was his idea.
That's neat.
And before that, maybe a couple months before that, this is something related to my music. I had Dokusan with him at Page Street, and I sat down, and he said something like, "Well, so what are your plans? Do you want to be a musician?" He knew I was a musician. You want to be a musician, or what do you want to do? And I hit the mat very forcefully. He said, "Look, I want to be here with you. That's what I want." And he didn't say anything, but when I got up to do 3 full bows, he got up and did 3 full bows to me.
Yeah.
So from his point of view, that response that I had was like, came from Buddha.
Yeah.
So he bowed to me like I was Buddha.
Yeah.
That's the way he was. And shortly after that, he said, about being ordained. So there was a very serious connection that happened that I think percolated down through the years and made me feel in the end that I had to finish what I started. So I did.
Yeah. Wow.
And I gave transmission to Ed Sadazan, and now he's leading Zen Center. And I gave transmission to Al Tribe, and regrettably he didn't live too much long after. But it really changed his life. I mean, he had always wanted to be a priest ever since the very early days with Suzuki Roshi, and it never quite worked out. And he was able to do it with me, and I was able to encourage him. He didn't think he could do it. He didn't think he had what it took, and I convinced him that he did. And I brought him all the way along, and he became quite a good teacher, apparently. At Vimala Sangha, people loved him. They loved his. He had a gift for touching people emotionally, and people loved him, and they loved the fact that he was very humble.
Yeah, no kidding. That's what I was thinking when you were saying that. Yeah.
And so I feel very good about that. And, his brother, the famous Lawrence Tribe.
Oh, yeah.
When he came to Al's funeral, he thanked me for all that I had done for Al.
Yeah.
He said it really completed Al's life. It really changed Al's life.
Yeah.
It was, even though Al didn't live too long, he was able to accomplish a lifelong dream, and I allowed him to do that. So that was very satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah. Last time I saw him, he was having dinner with Lawrence Tribe at the Panama Hotel, and I went up and said hello. But I didn't want to bother them, so I just said hello and walked off. And I've always regretted I didn't, because I'm a big fan of Lawrence Tribe. I wish I'd been a little more aggressive and met him.
Well, they were very, very close as brothers.
Yeah.
And Al had Lawrence had tremendous respect for Al. At Al's wedding, where he married Carol, Lawrence said, Al is the kindest man I know. And I gave transmission to Peter Shearson, but kind of lost touch with him. He's kind of gone off. He's a very talented poet, and he's a published poet now. So he's off doing that. And so, I finished. I feel that I finished the work that began when Suzuki Roshi ordained me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I finished it, and I think it's very common in the Zen tradition and certainly in the Tibetan tradition that after you finish your time in your life of public teaching and all of that, you kind of disappear, and often you become an artist of some kind. You become an artisan. You carve. You make tea bowls, or you write poetry, or you carve Buddha statues. I think in one famous case, you make bells, So I feel like it's that way my life has gone, and what I'm doing now is in that spirit. I mean, you don't do the same thing all of the time. And then, if somebody finds their way to where you live, like the editor of Tricycle found his way to me, then you do something.
Yeah.
And you found your way to calling me, and so I'm telling you this story. It's just that your karma persists out there in the world, and if people find you and ask you to do something, you do it, and if they don't, you don't, and you kind of live a quiet life, and that's how I see it.
I mean, I know everything you've been doing, but just hearing you go over all this really gives me a picture of, how you've evolved and how your practice has evolved, and the importance, of having periods where you're away from it. I really think that's important. To get out there and not be a big shot in Zen Center is really important, I think.
Well, David, I never. This may be funny to admit, but I was never interested in community, really. I was never interested in institution. I was interested in Suzuki Roshi.
Yeah.
His Dharma, his teaching.
Yeah.
All this stuff grew up around that, but I'm not sure even he really understood it. I mean, I remember when he first moved to Page Street, he said, "I don't know who I am here." He would wander around in the building. I mean, the whole idea of living together, it was all kind of, a 60s commune type of vision. And the whole point of buying Page Street, which Silas and Claude did while Richard was in Japan, was so that we could all live together with Suzuki Roshi, like at Tassajara. But, within a year he was gone. So the whole reason for doing it kind of vanished, but it just persisted.
2 years.
Yeah, it just persisted, and it became something. And I became, a big shot. I was treasurer, and then I was director, and then I was Tonto, and then I was, with Reb. We were the two anointed successors and all of that. Mm-hmm. And I realized when everything blew up, I didn't really want that. I didn't really care about it that much. It's not who I was.
Yeah, you were pretty vocal about it. You pretty much said you felt like you were living a lie somewhat, and you had to find your truth.
That's right. I mean, I was a very smart guy, and I had a lot of skills, and I was very useful to Richard in that way. But it wasn't my idea, it's not what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it was very far from my original feeling of just, I mean, in the early days, we all met Suzuki Roshi and saw the kind of human being that we was, and we all thought, well, I'd like to be that way. How can I be that way? This is the way a human being should be. And it was all about that. It was all about finding out what his wisdom was and what his path was. And listen, all the stuff that he taught us, Tassajara and all of that, as you know from living in Japan, that's the kind of practice that people do, boys and men do when they're in their late teens or early 20s. It's like kindergarten zen. Suzuki Roshi didn't do it for very long. I mean, almost all of his practice was in his temple with his teacher, and then by himself. I mean, my own feeling is that part of what made him a great teacher is the crucible of his life, what he had to endure and what he had to face, the Second World War, being a chaplain in Manchuria. Can you imagine what that was like?
He wasn't really he wasn't really a chaplain in Manchuria. He just visited there, and he was doing memorial services constantly because there were all these Japanese from where he came from, and they had no priest. So
well, I understand that,
but you think of chaplain as being for soldiers. He wasn't involved.
Well, whatever,
with
but I mean, the point is, the Second World War was horrific, and he had to live through it, and then he lived through the murder of his wife and all these things. I mean, I think that underneath his modest exterior, and he laughed all the time, I think he was a very, very strong, tough person.
Oh yeah.
Who had survived things that would have destroyed a lesser person, and it made him very soft and flexible. And by the time he got to us, when he was younger, according to Huitsu, he was just kind of an angry guy.
Yeah, he says so too. He says pretty much his life in Japan, he was angry and impatient, and Brian Victoria tells about Suzuki Roshi coming to Japan in like 1970, and he's looking for people maybe to come help, and he wanted Yokoi, who was a who was a professor at Komazawa, but was a great teacher who he wanted to come teach. And Yokoi told Brian Victoria, he said, good Lord, he's just this country priest, and he's starting this temple, this monastery in America. He said, but he's really changed. Because Yokoi knew him before. He said he must have been greatly influenced by the people he's worked with and the students in America, because he's really changed. And
he was.
Yeah, and I think that's a very, very important part of him, is that he just blossomed in America.
Well, he did, because he saw how Buddhism could start from nothing, like a seed.
Yeah.
You drop the seed in the right environment, and it blossoms. And he could never see that in Japan, because the plant had been growing for 1,500 years, and it was all, like vines. It was all, you couldn't see the origins of it. So, yeah. I mean, something happened. And it was a very unique time. When he died, and when we were at I'm sure you were there when you were at the cremation, Suzuki Roshi's cremation at the crematorium.
I missed the cremation. I was not told about it. I didn't know it was happening.
Well, that was bad. But anyway,
yeah.
I was. Everybody was very stoic, but I just cried and cried and cried. Angie and me were the ones who cried. I was so heartbroken.
I heard about crying. I heard there was a lot of crying. I didn't know it was just two of you.
Well, yeah. I mean, Dick and Hoitsu were just calmly doing the thing with his body, but we were crying and crying. And Oak-san was tremendously moved by that. And so was Hoitsu. When I met Hoitsu much later, when he came to Zen Center, he figured out that I was the one that cried and cried at his father's cremation. And he hugged me, and he was very moved, that I loved him that much. He said, "Oh, Chikudo-san, Chikudo-san. Oh, I remember." So he remembered that.
Yeah. Well, you got anything else to add? I mean, that's everything you say is really interesting to me.
Well, you're one of the few people that I would feel comfortable telling all this stuff to, because number one, you've been a lifelong friend. Number two, you understand everything I'm telling you. It's not that many people understand anymore. You were there for all of it, and you loved him the way I did, and also you've devoted your life to his work in a way that's unbelievable. You asked me to write something for fundraising, and I wrote down what I think, and you know what I think.
Yeah, it was very nice. Thank you.
Your dedication and your own devotion allows me to bring up these really quite personal things that I don't talk about with hardly anybody.
Well, it's good you do. There's nothing that I think you'd want to edit out. I did cut some stuff right there, just because, we got off topic. And then we started talking about Ed Brown, and we'll come back in on that.
And I think that Ed is number one. Suzuki Roshi loved Ed.
Yeah, oh yeah. And so did Dick.
He loved Ed because Ed had such a hard time. I think it reminded Suzuki Roshi of himself. And Ed also especially in Tomato Blessing's book, he tells stories about Suzuki Roshi better than almost anybody.
I agree. And so did Michael
Beautiful,
Katz.
beautiful stories.
Right.
Ed really has his heart. Ed has his heart. And I want Ed to be remembered as somebody that authentically transmitted and carried on a kind of heartfelt love and feeling for Suzuki Roshi. And also, Ed is a humble person, as you know. He doesn't blow his own horn. He doesn't acknowledge that he's a world famous author and all those things, which he is, and that there's an awful lot of people that came to Zen Center because of the Tassajara bread book.
Oh yeah, I meet people now. I meet people here in Bali. They don't know anything about Zen Center. They know about Ed's book. Yeah. Hey, Dick Baker told me he was on an airplane once, and he was avid of Zen Center, and he met somebody, and they said, "Oh, you're from the San Francisco Zen Center?" He said, "Yes." And the guy said, "Do you know Ed Brown?" Yeah.
I'm not interested in institutions, particularly institutions with a lot of real estate and money.
Yeah.
That's what tends to rule things. And I left almost 40 years ago, and I haven't looked back, and it's not something that is a part of my life and hasn't been for a long time. I've told you what I've done with my life, and I feel, one of the things in both of my aging books is, when you get to the end of your life, this is Erik Erikson life stages, which I use because I study with him in college.
Oh, no kidding. No kidding.
Yeah, at Harvard. He was a great guy. And then, of course, he was connected with Zen Center much later. But that he has what's called the stage of integrity, which means you can look back over your life and say, well, there are some things I would have done differently, but all in all, I did okay. I'm satisfied with the life I had. That really is what your life should come to. And I feel that way. I feel that I made mistakes, and I did things that if I had to look back, I wouldn't have done. But on the whole, finishing my obligation to Suzuki Roshi and my obligation to my family, working hard to build a nest egg, send my son to a good college, all those things. I feel like I did the things that are important to have done. And now I'm in good health pretty much, and I'm just, continuing my work.
Yeah.
But I feel okay about how things went. I don't have any regrets, really.
Yeah. Oh, I feel that when I look back on things I regret and failures, I realize that they helped make what is happening now, and without them, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't be who I am now, and I like it the way it is,
Right. Well, you can't separate. It's all part of the fabric of your life. And so part of what I'm doing now is I'm turning that knowledge about aging into books that can help other people, particularly right now when we're facing a pandemic that is pretty damaging and dangerous for older people, and will continue to be even if we get a vaccine. So the world has really changed, and it's hard to be an older person.
And once again, at this point, we ventured into other areas of conversation that I have omitted, and then we come to our goodbyes.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm glad I'm still in the game. I'm doing this class, and I'm doing a book, and, what do you say we stay in touch?
Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, hey, it's been great talking with you. Give my love to Amy.
Okay.
And say hi to Peter. Very good. Take care, and wonderful speaking with you.
Okay, we'll be in touch.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, that is the end of the phone chat with Lew. I'm going to read you a little something that I have on Kook.com. If you want to go to Lew Richmond's page there, it's just go to the homepage for Kook.com and write Lew Richmond, or just write Richmond, and a link will come up. Or you can go to the drop down for people and hit names, and then there are 500 or so names. This is from his page, then you link to other things. I went to Shunryu Suzuki Stories. That's a section on Kook.com. Memories of Suzuki Roshi from Wind Bells and DC Files. Lew Richmond. One day, Suzuki Roshi was giving a lecture downstairs at Sokoji. I think during sesshin. There was a crazy guy who'd been coming around during the sesshin, shouting, hitting the bells, creating a disturbance. During this lecture, he sat in the front in zazen posture, very close to Roshi. Everything he did was outrageous. He mimicked Suzuki Roshi's movements, made weird facial expressions, threatening gestures, etc. One of the things he did was to make blowing motions with his mouth toward the candle burning on the stage behind Suzuki Roshi's head. Suzuki Roshi took absolutely no notice of him throughout the lecture. I remember being worried that maybe the guy would try to attack Roshi or something. At the end of the lecture, Roshi got up, did his usual bows, etc., turned to leave, then whirled back and quickly blew out the candle, then walked up the aisle laughing loudly to himself. Question period after lecture, Sokoji. Various questions. I remember Janet asking about laughing and crying in emptiness. Roshi repeated the phrase a couple of times as though not understanding and started to laugh. He laughed, and then the audience started to laugh. Still laughing, Roshi said, "You are laughing. That is laughing in emptiness." Then he told a beautiful story about a pregnant female monkey confronted by a hunter who cried in emptiness for the hunter to spare her young. My version of the beating of John Steiner. I was very much into peace movement, draft resistant things at the time, and I asked Roshi, "What is war?" War, he said, war is like goza mats. The goza mats are like straw mats we lay out, and they're very thin. You roll them up. War is like these goza mats. When two people want to sit on one mat, they try to smooth out the wrinkles on their side, pushing them to the other side. When the wrinkles meet, that is war. This started a complicated discussion about the peace movement, whether it was right to march in demonstrations, resist the draft, etc. There was one person in the back who kept asking complicated questions about the peace movement, which organization was better, using movement slang and hippie jargon. Roshi didn't understand him very well, and John Steiner took on the function of translating the questions for this guy so Roshi could understand. Roshi kept trying to answer the questions very patiently, but suddenly he jumped up like a bat out of hell, rushed off the stage, and hit John Steiner 8 or 10 times as hard as he could, with his stick on the shoulder he's talking about. He shouted something like, "What are you dreaming?" to everyone. He went back and sat down and waited for a few minutes. "I'm not angry," he said, although he looked very angry. Then he went on to say something about how he was not selling zazen as the right way. The question John Steiner asked that provoked Suzuki Roshi to hit him was, "Well, Roshi, what is the right way?" So Roshi said, "I'm not trying to sell the right way. Our practice isn't like that." So that is that's one of the most told. I have many versions of that story on Kook.com. In fact, I have a page for different versions. I think it was Ron Browning in back, and I think the last thing he asked was, why, I wasn't there incidentally, I was at Tassajara, why are we in here listening to a lecture and meditating when we should be out there marching against the war? I think that was the last thing. And there was a peace march that day, which is one reason all this talk about war. And Suzuki did go walking in that peace march with some of his students. John Steiner was like, Suzuki would say, if he trusted someone, if they had a good understanding and a good relationship with them, he might use them as a way to give feedback to another person who wasn't ready for it. I think that's what happened to John. And he talked to Suzuki afterwards, and Suzuki, he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, he said, it reminded me of the war in Japan." When Amy and I were Anja and Jisha for Tatsugami Roshi at Tassajara, Suzuki Roshi was visiting Tatsugami Roshi in his cabin, and we were serving the tea. Also, we served Greek olives, the bitter kind. There was a plate in the center of the room with all the olive pits on it. Suzuki Roshi noticed some of the pits had a slight bit of olive meat remaining, so he proceeded to clean off all the pits in his mouth, one by one. So I think I will stop there. I could read a lot of stuff from Lew's interview and Lew's page, but I think I'll leave that up to you. Really appreciate Lew being our guest today for our phone chat. Really interesting. I look forward to seeing what Lew comes up with his new book, with his new music. Right after I say goodbye, there'll be some of his music. But now I'm going to say goodbye. This has been a Kook audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Kook Audio and Kook Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Doggett Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka, wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.